was in year 2 at primary school, so I was 7 or 8 years old. I remember this one time when we were all given an opportunity to do some quiet reading, probably for 10 minutes or so in the classroom. And while we were reading, my friend tapped me on the shoulder and she said to me, "You were doing this." And then she proceeded to do an impression of me, and she kind of held the book like this and she shook it around, and in my memory she even stood up and kind of moved off her chair a bit while she did it. And I was just completely mortified. My stomach just dropped, because in my head the book had been on the desk the entire time, just flat down on the desk, and I'd just been reading quietly like anybody else. But obviously I hadn't been. I probably said something like, "No, I didn't," and just kind of shrunk into myself. And that feeling, that awful shame, is the feeling that autistic people, a lot of autistic women in particular, are trying to avoid when we mask. And that's why we mask, because we don't want to be seen as socially unacceptable. We don't want to be ostracized. At that age, I didn't realize why I flapped objects. It started with my hands as a very young child, and then it moved on to objects. And still now when I read, I move the book a lot. I flap the pages. I sometimes smell the pages as I'm reading. I kind of like fold the pages in this funny little way as I'm reading with one hand. I didn't understand that it actually helped my concentration and helped to make the experience of reading, which was already something that I absolutely loved, it made it even more immersive for me. And in a classroom that was probably quite noisy and there were a lot of distractions, it would have helped me. And that's why to me it seemed like the book was flat on the table and there was nothing else in my consciousness other than that book and that story, because I was doing all this movement that probably seemed very, very odd to somebody on the outside. The only thing I knew about the flapping was that it wasn't something I should share. My parents had never made me feel bad for it. I did sometimes do it at home still in front of my mom. As I got older, I got increasingly more embarrassed about it, but that was more on me than her. She'd never done anything. She thought it was cute and sweet and something that I did to help me be creative, which it was. I grew to be more and more embarrassed about it, and I certainly knew from occasions like that it wasn't something I could do in social situations if I wanted to be perceived as normal and like everyone else. And of course, that's, how most of us do want to be perceived, for better or for worse. So masking is hiding or attempting to hide your autistic traits. I say attempting because apparently, and yeah, looking back on my life it makes sense, we're not very good at doing it. Ironically, a study I recently conducted with colleagues found that masking didn't change the judgments that non-autistic peers made towards autistic people's social behaviours. Even when an autistic person is masking, non-autistic people will still rate them more harshly than non-autistic peers if they don't know they're autistic. This unconscious bias is evident throughout society for anyone deemed to behave or think atypically by neurotypical standards. And when I think back to my primary school days now, I hear a lot of other people my age, they agree with me that high school was trash, but primary school people are like, "Oh no, it was great and everyone was friends with each other and it was just really lovely, and high school was just such a shock." And for me, primary school just feels like a montage of different people coming up to me and telling me I was weird, and me having no idea where it came from. When you think about that, I might as well have just sat there and flapped the damn book and had a good time. I do think by college I was a lot better at masking. People might have thought that there was something a bit quirky about me, but it wasn't necessarily seen as a negative thing, and my social skills had definitely improved and I made quite a lot of friends. Unfortunately then, that just became very difficult for me to manage and quite stressful, and the whole thing ended in me being very burnt out and exhausted. But what does masking actually feel like from the inside? Masking can feel like over-analyzing your body language and your posture and your facial expressions and your eye contact with people and the things that you're saying and how you're saying them. It was only after I spoke to quite a few introverted friends and family members that I realized that not every introverted person has this constant internal monologue about, "So now I'm looking at them, they're looking at me. Okay, now they're looking away. Should I look away too? Okay, now we're sitting down. How do I sit down like a normal person? Am I sitting down okay? Should I cross my leg? Are they gonna cross their leg? Okay, maybe I'll cross my leg. Okay, now what do I do with my hands? What do I do with my hands? Hands are always the worst thing. Now I'm gonna put them on the table. Do I put them down this way or with palms up better? No, that just looks really weird. Okay, I'm gonna put them in my lap. Okay, she's saying something sad. It is sad. Yes, is my face sad enough?" This constant internal policing, it can be really distracting, obviously, to have that going on in your head and then also be trying to concentrate on what the other person's saying. And the whole time as well, you've got to try and make sure you look relaxed. So that's another kind of thought going through your head. You have to try and make it look like it's not such a strain for you. When you mask, you may do things that feel uncomfortable for you, like making eye contact, even though that actively hurts your concentration. And if you were going to be yourself and be as engaged as you possibly could in the conversation, you might choose to stare at a fixed object instead, or kind of look around the room like I do when I'm recording a video. You may find yourself trying to make sure that you actively look interested in what the other person is saying. I'm sure some neurotypical people might relate to this to some extent, you know, like trying to make yourself look like, oh, when you're really not interested. But like, even if you are interested as an autistic person, I still found myself thinking, do I look interested? Do I look as sincere as I feel on the inside? How do I copy this emotion inside and paste it onto my face? And it's one of the most like calming things about Zoom calls is that you can see your own face, and obviously you also don't want to look like you're looking down at your own face all the time, but you can see what you're doing with your expression and you can alter it a bit if you feel like it's not quite correct. Some autistic people do practice facial expressions in the mirror for this reason, so they can kind of see, does this convey what I want it to convey? And I think naturally, and one of the reasons why maybe I struggled at primary school is that my face looked quite closed and maybe quite blank sometimes, and it just wasn't particularly inviting for other people before I learned kind of how to, you know, mold it more. I think still, like, it can be a bit over the top sometimes because I feel like I'm trying so hard and putting so much effort in. You might analyze the body language and the facial expression of the person that you're talking to, and you might then try to mirror it. I definitely do this to some extent. It's like, okay, we're doing this now. All right, I can do that too. I'll get in on that, sure. If you mask a lot, you might relate to the phrase, when in doubt, laugh. I remember watching this amazing live stream on friendship between Mom on the Spectrum and Woodshed Theory. I'll leave it linked down below. They talk about how neurotypical people just laugh all of the time at everything, even when things aren't that funny. And so when you mask, you gotta kind of laugh a lot. And that was literally my masking throughout high school. I laughed all the time. And sometimes, well, probably relatively frequently, at jokes that were actually at my expense. And you may have had thoughts about like, what the flip do you do with your hands? Like, what even are they? Why are they attached to my body? You may I've heard people in the autistic community talking about the good old T-Rex arms. My son, who is 3 years old, asked me, "Man, why is your hand doing this? Why is your hand like this?" If I'm walking, if I have like my bag on one shoulder and I like kind of hold one hand and then like the other hand is like chilling, you know. I don't know, why is this comfy? Why do we not know how to operate them? And I've got such long spindly fingers, which I think is actually a thing that is related to autism. I've got even more of them to deal with, is what you're telling me. Pockets are useful. You can shove them in pockets. They're just so tricky. They just can hang so limply by your side. I'll sometimes like cover them in my sleeves, then I get to flap them as well, which is quite nice. I like folding them, but I did actually get sent off in a PE lesson for doing that once, because it looked like, I don't know, insolence. It looked like I was not wanting to be there, which in fairness, I wasn't. I didn't want to be there. Another thing you might do if you mask is you may write scripts for social situations. Before social situations, I will still, on the notes on my phone, there's probably loads of them if I go through my notes on my phone, I will type out some questions. If I'm working with someone new or someone I've worked with before for my business, I will think about a few things that I can ask them when I see them, and it just calms me down just to have those written out and then try and memorize them. And then when I see them, I'm not just like blanking and then maybe just blurting out something stupid because I didn't have anything planned to say. You may have a few set phrases that you say in particular circumstances as well. I suppose I decided one day that I was gonna start saying, "Have a nice day." I just thought, ooh, that sounds like something a person would say. Person-y, okay, cool. I staple that to the end of my interactions now, and it kind of often is a bit like a mumble or a bit like, I don't think I sound sure of it as I say it quite. Like it's a bit like, yeah, sometimes I'm like, oh, maybe I should change it to afternoon or morning or evening or rest of your day. And then sometimes I say it and it's like the day's nearly over and I'm like, ooh, that was dumb. And it's like, okay, it's near the weekend, maybe have a good weekend. This is why I don't leave the house. You may find yourself doing something called fawning, which is a threat response. So like fight, flight, or freeze. There's also fawning, which is where you make yourself look pleasing to whatever is threatening you. So you might just be a bit passive in social situations, very agreeable. If someone says, do you want to do this or this, you might go, I don't mind, even though you're normally somebody in a comfortable situation who would be quite opinionated, but maybe you literally in that moment can't even think of what you would choose if you were in a safe situation, because you just are just like, I don't mind. You might agree with people when you don't actually agree with what they're saying, and then you get home later on and you're like, why did I say that? Like, that was basically a lie. You're essentially pushing down your own personality, your own wants and needs in order to be pleasing to the other person, and kind of letting the other person get their own way, and doing everything you can to make sure that other person is okay and that they're okay with you, completely forgetting about your own needs and whether you're okay with that other person. I will literally, if I'm talking to someone, one, I think it's because I have difficulty with switching tasks, so it might not entirely be to do with this reason, but I think it partially is. If I need the toilet, I often just won't go. I feel like it could be perceived as rude, maybe, like I just don't know how to, the timing, when do I put that in that I need to, and other people can just be like, I just need the toilet back, and they just go and they just put their own needs first. I don't like being inauthentic though, and I don't like being fake, and I think this whole fawning response is quite distressing for me, because then I come home and I'm like, why? Why are you like this? I would think to myself, before I knew about autism all the time, why can't you just be yourself? And then it was maybe a year or a few months before I discovered that I was autistic. I am autistic. I was at home. I was, in my real skin, and I was just analysing how I behaved, and I was like, oh no, I can see why you can't be yourself. Like, you couldn't sit like this, you couldn't have this posture, like it would just be seen as odd. You may find if you do this fawning response or any sort of masking that you have meltdowns when you come out of these situations sometimes. Probably particularly if you're at high school and are a hormonal teenager, but like you've just been suppressing your own needs and pushing them down all day, and it can kind of lead to this kind of emotional outburst once you do finally get into a safe situation and you can feel like you can finally let it out, that it all comes out, everything that you've kind of been internalizing all day. I think women are probably more likely to fawn and maybe mask in general, because I mean, women are kind of expected to people please, autistic or not. You're yelled at to smile by random strangers on the street. We're just supposed to be pleasant little robots. And I mean, if you imagine two people at the school gates, both of them don't like small talk, and they're not very expressive, and they don't smile a whole lot, and you imagine one's a man and one's a woman, and you just think about which one is going to be seen as more socially acceptable. And I think in a way, and when I look at my own family, I see this as well, men can almost hide their autism sometimes more in plain sight. They maybe have a little bit more of an allowance to not be super social and to be a little bit more eccentric and whatever. And also, women judge other women very harshly. Some people feel like they're playing a character when they're masking. Some people literally do analyze TV programs and try to kind of develop a persona based on a character, or take little behaviors that a character does, like me thinking about how I say have a nice day. You might pick up a phrase that someone says on TV or something that they do and think, okay, I'm going to do that now. I definitely make personas for myself and rebrand myself, I suppose. So I did this for sure before I went to college. I decided I'm going to wear this kind of thing, I'm going to do my hair like this, my makeup will be like this, I'm going to be this sort of person who does this kind of thing, and I'm going to be extroverted basically. And I put myself in a box, and I then tried to be this person. And the scary thing was that people believed me, and they believed I was this person. Occasionally there were people who were like, oh, you're so shy, oh my god, which is just like the worst that you can say to someone who's shy. It's like, great, I'll just crawl under a rock and never speak again. But I had friends. I did okay until I didn't, and completely burnt out and became extremely exhausted by the whole thing and couldn't maintain it any longer, and it just felt so false and off-key and just wrong, because I was just like, no, this isn't me, because people are liking you and approving of you, but it's not you. There's something icky about it. And I did make some real amazing friends who kind of I knew a little bit deeper than that like surface level self, but it wasn't great. And this is the one thing that I personally identified a little bit. I remember reading quite a few years ago the traits of borderline personality disorder, because I'd never heard of it before, so I looked it up and did some research. And it's a common misdiagnosis for women with autism. You can have both at the same time, but there is a common misdiagnosis as well. One of the symptoms of borderline personality disorder is feeling insecure about who you are, with your sense of self changing significantly depending on who you are with. So you can kind of see why maybe this could be a common misdiagnosis for autistic women. Like, I often had the need to reinvent myself and to sit and think about, okay, I'm not happy with who I am and how I'm coming across in the world right now. How can I change and be better and be more palatable and be more like I should be? And it would often work for a while, and then I'd run out of stamina and it would start to feel icky, and I just wasn't able to sustain it anymore, and I would withdraw into myself then for a long period of time afterwards in order to recover. Rather than characters in a program, you may idolize specific people, maybe copy phrases that they do and things like that in your life. When I look back at it, I think when I say I was trying to be extroverted at college, I think I was trying to be like some of my extroverted friends and people that I knew who had ADHD actually. And I think now, looking back at it, I'm like, I probably saw a little bit of a similarity between us. And you know, people with ADHD sometimes don't have much of a filter. They kind of, you know, they say what they think, and that to me probably felt very honest and authentic. And because they were charismatic, they kind of got away with it, and I liked the way they carried themselves. They were different, they were quirky, they were unique, but they also were palatable and appealing to other people. Obviously, I realize now that people with ADHD do have their own social barriers, and they were probably not entirely happy always with how they were coming across socially, so it's a bit ironic. As a result of masking, I often read posts from autistic women saying things like they don't really know who they are now. After years of masking, they find out that they're autistic in their 20s, in their 30s, in their 40s, beyond, and they're like, okay, now what? Who am I? I think this is even more likely to be the case if you had parents who weren't supportive, who kind of maybe made fun of some of your autistic traits, or maybe they weren't very supportive of your interests, and I can't even imagine how difficult that is. Luckily, I did have parents who obviously weren't perfect, but were, you know, pretty amazing. Luckily, I think I do have quite a good sense of self when I'm at home, and that might be thanks to my parents in many ways. Then it's like, once you get out into the world, where do you put yourself? And that's incredibly difficult. How to make what I am at home fit into the world, I don't really know how to do that still after 26 years of being on this earth. But maybe that will change for future generations, and that's one of the reasons why I want to make this video. I don't have an autistic child, maybe I'll have an autistic grandchild, and I think about that, and I think about this imaginary autistic granddaughter, and I just think, maybe if people had known about autism, they knew what it was, they understood it. It wasn't stigmatized to say you were autistic, and I knew if I'd known I was autistic and had been able to say that, maybe things would have been different, and maybe things would have been easier in some way. Although it is complicated and potentially damaging, I think to some extent masking and the ability to mask is a privilege. I can go out for my videography business. If I'm going to film something, I can make eye contact. It might not be very good. It might be a little bit hit and miss, but I can make eye contact. That is something that is valued in society, so I do accept that it is a privilege, and it does maybe have its place. I can't do it all the time, and then that makes it so hard. As I say, where do you put yourself in the world? And some of us have to do it every day, and I don't really have a solution for that right now. I would love to look into all the research on mental health and masking and see what it says, and you know, the pros and the cons and all that kind of stuff, and maybe look into removing the mask, unmasking. Is it possible? Is it wise? How do we do it? Can I use myself as a guinea pig and see what happens? It might be super interesting. So please subscribe, if you'd like to see that. And if you found this video valuable, then you might like my previous videos. I made 3 videos about traits, autistic traits in women, but you know, all the genders. First video was about social stuff, second video about sensory stuff, and the third video unfortunately doesn't involve alliteration. It was emotions and, what was it? Emotions and interests, that was it. Don't know what this is. Some form of interesting stim, that's what it was. Anyway, goodbye. I had the urge to say goodbye in another language, but I will not do that because it's probably wrong. Bye!